But first of all, let's introduce our people. I don't think that Tansy and Mutlu need any further introduction. They're key members of the WTiN team, and you've seen them already today. But I'll ask our other panelists to introduce themselves and say what their companies are and what their role in those companies is. Starting with you, first of all, Kerry, if you may.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Kerry King, and I manage the research and development team at Spoonflower. We are an e-commerce company. We're headquartered in Durham, North Carolina. We have an operation in Berlin as well. And within our business, we basically focus on producing fabric by the yard. We also print wallpaper and have more recently moved into some finished home textile products. So within the context of our team, we're really responsible for all of the equipment investigation and the implementation of the technologies that we bring in-house, working closely with our factory teams. And I like to think of us as the technical product development team. When we work on new fabrics, it's our team that really does all of the physical and operational testing of those substrates.
Thank you, Kerry. And Aki.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. My name is Aki Ohno. Oh, by the way, my wife is Yoko. So she's Yoko Ohno. Just remember me as John Lennon. Yes, I was former division director of Konica Minolta in charge of Inkjet. And now I left the company at the age of 62 years old. Now I'm independent consultant for Inkjet business and technology. So actually my background is never ever fashion or textile, but I know much about the Inkjet business and those business and technology because I was in charge of selling the business Inkjet head and messenger printer for textile industry and also commercial printer sector. So if it is Inkjet is concerned, you can ask me. Don't ask me as a fashion. I'm not a fashionable guy. Thank you.
And finally, Felipe.
Thank you very much. My name is Felipe Sanchez. I'm CEO of Global Química e Moda, which stands for Global Chemical and Fashion in Portuguese. We are a 13-year-old company, basically a supplier of consumables for digital printing. We've been working with digital printing for the past 10 years. We supply overall over 300 tons of ink for the Brazilian domestic market, and it's a big pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Felipe. I'm going to start very simply, just by asking each of our panelists who've had a few days to look around ITMA to tell us what's the most interesting thing they've seen here so far in the digital print realm. Maybe starting with you, Tansy, at the end.
It's difficult to say because I don't want to take away from the industrial innovations that there are, which are obviously very important, but I'm a particular fan of Ichinosi's sock printing machine that's new for the show. It's really fast. It sort of seems to be completely different to anything I've seen, even though I've seen some digital printers for socks in Asia before. This one seems to be a bit of a step change for that, so that would be my favorite in the digital printing space at ITMA.
Kerry?
I sort of start from a position of I love ITMA. I'm really geeky about this show because I think it's a really great place for people like me to come and learn about textile processing in general, so I try to get outside the printing hall. But within our business, we're really heavily focused on technologies that don't involve water. So we've been kind of beating the drum around pigment printing for a really long time, and so what's exciting for us is to see so many companies really investing in the development of pigment printing solutions, which makes it possible for us to grow as a business.
Thank you, Kerry. We maybe come back to pigments later on, but let's carry on down the line. Mutlu, what have you seen?
Well, this is my first ITMA, and I came on Saturday, and I was mainly in the poultry, with the printing part of it. And for me, like, I think for the pigment, but I will say the Nina Coldenhouse transfer paper for pigment printing is the most interesting innovation at the show. Yeah.
Thank you. Aki?
Yeah, biggest impact for me, myself, I joined this ITMA 8 years ago, first time in Barcelona. And of course, I was in charge of ITMA Milan, 2015. So if you compare the last 8 years, starting from 2011 to today, it's a big jump. That is the one of the most amazing thing for me. And last 4 years is another jump. It's good. And the second thing is that the people not typically from the textile industry, typically like HP or EFI or even a Konica Minolta is joining this industry, and that will give certain impact from different point of view, not conventional textile-oriented mind, but from network-oriented or digital printing that is going to bring a new knowledge and new ideas and new technology here. And personally, as a product, I see Toshin Ichinose, they launched the Konica Minolta's Messenger 10 scanning printer engine plus their own screen printing machine. I think that will give certain impact or certain interest, draw certain interest for the conventional textile people as a bridge to digital. Okay.
Thank you, Aki. And finally, Felipe.
Well, a few things that dragged my attention were the socks printing, of course. And as we work a lot with reactive, we see very new ways to apply pre-treatment, which I think it was something that was really old-fashioned with just the fuller option. So that's something that drags my attention with foaming, with spray that seems to be getting better. I'm really interested in a lot of the workflow automation. So we see a lot of customers that are now talking about not only the output of the machine, but what can I do with my workflow to get more production, which is really something interesting. And pigment printing, of course, which we're surely going to access, but I think that it's finally having some traction, and therefore some possibilities for markets that are emerging on it, like Brazil.
Okay, thank you. Before we go on, has anybody got any questions that they are straining to ask, maybe arising from Tansy's presentation that you didn't get an opportunity to put to her specifically on that occasion, or anything that you are anxious to ask the panel? Okay, but not yet, but we'll see later on. We've got an interesting geographical spread of participants here, representing South America, the Far East, Kerry from the USA, and Mutlu, who, although she works with us in the UK, is from Turkey, and I know keeps very close contact with the industry there. And I'm just going to ask the panelists just to give us a bit of a flavour of what is special and what's happening in the markets in which they work, the geographical markets they work. Perhaps beginning with you, Mutlu, what's the current situation in Turkey with their economic ups and downs and the war on their borders?
Yeah, firstly, I need to mention that because there was an election in Istanbul yesterday, so but only in Istanbul, so people from Bursa or other cities, I'm sure they were here, and people from Istanbul, they may come today, or they came and left yesterday, I don't know. And apart from that, there's lots of economical problems in Turkey. The currency is also impacting the industry. But at the same time, when I talk with manufacturers, Turkey is still one of the biggest and most important country for digital textile printing market. At the same time, there is a very big competition there, and there is a high pressure on the prices and everything. I made a list yesterday, so including BDR inks, which was bought by EFI Vejani, there are 8 local ink manufacturers in Turkey, and it is likely that we will see a couple of more in the coming years. So, and their quality is increasing. I mean, maybe a couple of years ago we were not talking about a lot, especially the reactive ink manufacturers have always been good and still very good. Sublimation manufacturers are becoming very aggressive with prices and quality, but their aim is to, all the local manufacturers' aim is to decrease the European brands' share in the market and become more dominant in the market. So I think this is very important thing to consider and track for Turkey. I can say, what else? Yeah, and again, the BDR EFI acquisition had a big impact in the market again because there are lots of machines from Italian companies, especially from Reggiani in Turkey, and this acquisition will help them also to dominate the ink market with their like Turkish inks. I think it is and like in terms of machinery, like for inks, this is very clear. Machinery, like Italian machines are dominating Turkish market, but for sublimation, I see a lot of Chinese machines installations in Turkey because the quality is good and they think that the print head is Japanese, so everything is fine, the prices are low, because price is a big issue in Turkey, and especially it is impacting the payments, and therefore Turkish companies can deal with this kind of payment issues, but it is a bit difficult for European manufacturers to give some support to the Turkish market. It is complicated, but it is going very well at the end of the day.
Aki, I know that you've been disappointed at the slowness of the market in Japan to pick up on digital technology. We've had a couple of events there, 2-3 events there over recent years in order to try and deliver the message about the advantages there. Are we seeing any development in the digital textile industry there? Is it picking up there? And what's happening in the neighboring markets in Far East Asia, in East Asia?
Actually, Japan, as you just pointed out, the movement is quite slow. So Japan is way ahead of other countries at the center of inkjet head development. Like if you think about 10 piezo-based head manufacturer, 8 or maybe 9 is based in Japan. So actually that we have some joke that the Japanese, they produce device, European, they develop the system and print, and Chinese follows, American buys. At the end of the day, Japanese pays for that. So GDP point of view, Japan and China as the biggest economy in the Asia, but the effort and volume and percentage-wise, digital, textile printing at least, that is unproportionally low in Japan. I don't know why, but anyway, I need your help to open up Japan market or change Japanese very conservative way of thinking. Once Japanese is watching carefully outside what is happening, once they convince, they will do all of a sudden a big effort. So I need your help. And as for Asia, China, I think the situation is completely different. Also the positioning in the textile industry is different. So it's a big market. They also have a big market within China, and they have a big export economy to the outside of China. So I think the percentage-wise and the volume-wise is big market and manufacturing point. It may change, as in this morning Mutlu pointed out, U.S., China economy war, that might change the position of China a little bit. So maybe some other company, other countries other than China, some Eastern Asia countries, Vietnam or Cambodia or Indonesia, Thailand, will positively affected by that kind of things. Thank you.
Okay. Felipe, in Brazil, the textile industry suffered a bit of a crisis quite recently, and I think that put a big brake on investment there. But I think quietly the digital textile industry has been growing quite rapidly, and in fact there is now a very large number of companies in Brazil printing digitally.
Yeah, that's true. And interestingly, I think that we kind of own some of the growth of digital through the last 8 years in Brazil to the crisis we had, because some of the retailers, they really didn't want to have any stock, so they turned into digital for also because they didn't want to have large stocks and import. So we have a very specific characteristic in Brazil that we have a lot of rotary that is getting from China to Brazil. And of course, digital printing is made in Brazil. So in a way, some of the retailers they were importing containers and container loads of rotary, and they would give up because of the crisis. They didn't want to put money on it and have a bad cash flow. So they decided to go digital and outsource their digital printing in Brazil because of the crisis. So somehow, of course, it was bad, but in a way, it helped people to believe in digital. So digital grew a lot in Brazil. Interestingly, we don't export anything, so everything that we produce in terms of textiles and garments is for domestic market. We have neighbor countries that are much better than we are in exporting. Peru, for example, they export a lot to U.S. and other countries. We unfortunately have a very old and very bad taxation system that makes us very expensive, so we cannot export anything, so not even maybe 2-3%. Our neighbors, Argentina, are in a very complicated crisis, but growing in digital as well. So is Colombia, growing a lot. So Colombia is an interesting market. But again, Brazil just changed presidents last years. It might be arguable in terms of his political philosophy. They say we have our Trump, which I don't know if it's good or bad. They call him mini Trump, so we're going to see what that means. But regardless of any political ideas, the change on what was going on in Brazil really had a very, very nice effect on economy. It might still be kind of a placebo effect because nothing really changed, no new rules, nothing is really approved. But regardless of that, just because the mood has changed, we've seen major investments in January, February. We have a record attendance of Brazilian customers to ITMA, so we're expecting to see a very significant growth. So if we could grow 20-25% in the middle of Brazil's worst recession of all times, we really expect things to get much, much better now that we're finally going out of this crisis.
Okay, that's very positive. And Kerry, I mean, we know that the B2C market is very significant in the United States, and indeed that's your area of the business.
Yeah.
But we also hear stories, nothing very positive, rumors that there is an element of reshoring happening, that there is the beginnings of a development of a new supply chain in which digital printing could play a part in the United States. Are you seeing evidence of that on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, that was really the trend I was going to highlight, is this whole concept of the microfactory. I think there's a lot of, I would put it in the category of buzz, just as you're describing. I think there are a fair number of watchers and people asking good questions, and there are a healthy number of doers as well. I think for the most part, there's a challenge around who is going to take these things on, and it's happening in bits and pieces in various sort of established businesses, I would say, throughout the southeastern region. One of the big challenges is really still sewing. I think we have a relatively strong knowledge base around still the cut and sew process and how eventually that integrates with the printing step. But the labor around the sewing operation and the management of styles and different product features is still a challenge, and I don't think that anybody has really figured it out. I think there are lots of people interested in how to sort of tap into communities where unemployment rates may be still sort of high or modest. In our region, the unemployment rate is really low, and so finding sewing labor is challenging. But I think what that means is that it's a setting that's ripe for automation in sewing. So, for example, that's an area of interest for us, is how can we create a sewing environment that is not the sewing of old, but is a new manufacturing setting that's appealing to work in, and that creates variety in the work life, and that integrates well with our other digital processes. So.
Tansy, I don't want to leave you out, but I feel that there's less to say about the UK if we take the UK as being your market.
Yeah.
My impression is that with the one or two exceptions, the UK is a digital market for the high fashion industry and for designer brands, and a lot of small-scale production for independent designers, and that at an industrial level, it's still only just beginning to get off the ground. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think I would agree. I know there's some businesses in London in particular that have been set up with digital printing for sampling for the brands that are London-based. There's some e-commerce, web-to-print, Spoonflower-esque businesses that have been set up as well. But again, I think it's on a smaller scale in comparison to what's happening in the US. I think the one thing I would say that's different is maybe that we do have a hub of Suez still in the UK, although there are some issues there around whether they're getting a fair wage or not. I don't know enough about that to comment more, but obviously they should be getting a fair wage. But there are skills there at least. I think people coming into the UK from other countries actually have brought that skill set into the UK because it was lost for quite a while. So maybe that could help with some further uptake in digital technology for printing to complement that.
Okay, now, before we go in, any hands up here? Anybody like to ask a question? We have one at the front here.
Thank you again. Now that you are talking about future, no? or ideas in next future, I'm thinking and listening a lot in conferences and people talking about a lot of this rent and sharing type of business. And now I see almost that in brands, in manufacture businesses. I want to ask you, you ever thought about do some rent or sharing business with fabrics or your type of businesses? I don't know if this is something that you can, or maybe you thought.
Sorry, you're saying rent or sharing with fabric, the fabric supply that you would print on?
The products. For example, in Spoonflower, that, well, I congratulate to you, like, for your business. It's amazing. Something democratic. Well, for example, if there is some idea of renting or that type of.
I think that's a really interesting question. It's not something that I've thought a lot about. I would say that in terms of fabric supply, one of our challenges as a business is we're a very quick turn kind of environment, and we need to have fabric there that's ready to print when we need it. And so we also, from a facility standpoint, are limited in terms of our warehousing capabilities, and like everyone, trying to control our inventory on that supply. So the whole question of how to manage that fabric supply very tightly is an interesting challenge for us, and it requires a lot of watchful diligence and really great partnerships with fabric suppliers. And I think sort of layered into that challenge is partnerships with suppliers that really understand the high level of quality that's required to digitally print in a way that where you don't get a lot of waste associated with it. So I think I would say we're open to creative ideas. That's not an area that we've ventured into, but it's definitely a problem to solve for.
In the context of the new supply chain structures that we're looking at here and on demand, have you as a business explored the feasibility of moving on demand upstream to the fabric and the pre-treatments?
Yeah, we've kind of approached that to date in from the standpoint of working with an intermediary, a converter, essentially, that holds the inventory of a lot of the fabrics that we print on. And so that has been, to date, our method of pushing that. Somebody else is really controlling the fabric supply, and we have a good partnership with those few suppliers that we have in terms of them feeding us supply as we need it. As we grow in terms of location, all of that becomes a little more complex, though. And of course, one of the things we're very aware of is that as the pricing opportunity improves, the potential market for our products also grows. So we want everyone to win in this process. It's not a good business if the fabric supplier is carrying the heaviest burden, but we do see that being able to control all those costs is an important feature to growth.
Okay, Felipe, did you want to contribute?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that interestingly, we just had a startup company in Brazil. I'm going to fail to remember the name now, but they came up with a business model. I don't know if it's famous anywhere else, but they rent and share high couture dresses and stuff like that. It's very new in Brazil, It's it's not still not very famous there, but the people that have it will place it there, and they get a fee for every time that someone rents, and it gets more democratic for the people that want to use it. They keep it for a night, for a week or so. So it's probably something that it's going to start to in South America as well. At least it's new for us.
Any further questions at this point? Back here.
So I've got a follow-up question on this rent of systems or give away the systems. It's essentially a way of locking down the system, right, for the ink supply, which tends to lead to a race to the bottom on price. So how do you think people will be able to differentiate from the competition if you're all locked into using the same consumables?
I can answer that from the standpoint of pigment printing solutions, which is sort of a narrow answer to the question, apologies. But one of the things that we have found in our space is that the technology has only recently come to a level of maturity where there are options to begin with on ink supply. And a lot of the solutions, even though if you go down the show floor, you'll find technologies where the systems are open. For the most part, what we have learned is that there's a really important marriage that has to happen between the printhead technology and the ink formulation. So it's not so easy to dabble in testing of different inks and going with the cheapest solution. For us, it's really important that we get great runnability with the inks that we're working with, and that from a product standpoint, the product we're offering to our customer is the best that it can be in terms of fastness, properties, in combination with fabric hand. So we're not necessarily opposed to a closed system or I think the kind of scenario, the rental sort of supply scenario could potentially work in our business as long as the product was really great and that we weren't being overcharged for the technology.
Okay. Anybody else want to contribute on that?
If I may comment on that, I think Brazil has a very specific scenario for that because the customers in general in the textile industry, they are completely against closed systems. So it really scares them. You say closed system and they run away from the booth. So if you see a Brazilian running, they probably heard closed system. And so it's probably due to some situations we had in the past when they were tied up with suppliers and the price was higher. But anyways, I think that that is a market trend. Anyway, I agree that not every time it's reliable when you have alternative ink. But for the solutions that are in Brazil now with Kyocera heads and with the inks we have there, they have worked very well technically. So we have a very long lifetime of print heads. So customers overall are very satisfied with getting the machine from one side and the ink from the other side. So I think that presents a challenge for the closed system and for the print as a service model, of course, because customers are experienced on knowing who are the good suppliers, who are the bad suppliers. They're very experienced. They're very industrial. So I think that the closed system is a trend. It would just have to prove itself as being competitive, as you said. So the customer needs to be really comfortable with getting tied up with a manufacturer and knowing that they will be competitive against their competitor. That's what they're concerned about. So I think it's very specific for Brazil, perhaps.
And I think it's probably there's more flexibility in the reactive and dye sublimation space.
True.
Because those technologies are just much further along and probably not as finicky.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, I have been always supporting for the closed system because the closed system, it sounds quite negative, and open system sounds quite positive. I have been working for Konica Minolta. So we offer, not anywhere, Konica Minolta or Epson or those companies that has printer and print head and ink that they want to offer. But think about how much cost, R&D cost to develop digital printer involved. So there are many people that just copy the printer, but there is a lot of digital know-how and patent and R&D costs involved. And the ink for those companies is just selling the ink and put the margin and return that, because the printer could not be sold at a high price if they allocate all R&D cost to the printer. It is never ever competitive. And today, that is the reason why I have been always pushing and convincing people, try to convince people that a closed system that works, because on the other hand, open system, that if something wrong happens, who is responsible for that? Okay, ink company, typically ink-only company, they just put small margin onto their cost of the product and just sell it. So it's obviously it's cheap if compared with a closed system ink price. And but what happens if something wrong happens? Nobody takes care. Nobody wants to be responsible to compensate the damage happens to the printing company. So I think that was my original logic. But today, new technology is coming, and closed system, the people who is doing effort to create and offer some new ink, maybe the open system, that a lot of open knowledge is there. So for the benefit for the end user, printing company, I think there should be some benefit from the open system. The point is that everybody should enjoy the fluid. So even open system people should always think about your ink could not work without a printer. And to develop digital printer, that involves a lot of cost. And if the printer manufacturer, high-level printer manufacturer, let's say Epson or Norton or SPG or whatever, who pays a lot of patent fee and R&D fee, and will not get the return from that, they will lose the interest to improve the printer. So, okay, open system, good. Your closed system, not forever. But the point is, everybody should share the reasonable profit to cover its cost generated at the point. Okay?
And if I may do a final remark on that, I think that there is also an important point on how much profit does the customer, does the owner of the machine can make on that. So probably one of the answers on why Reactive is so against closed systems, because these guys are really fighting against each other and trying to sell on the cent, the fabric. So they are really fighting on it. Whereas what you see, for example, the direct-to-garment printers in Brazil, that are coming out, the industrial one, these customers are not even asking if it's open or not, because they have a $1 print cost, and they're selling the shirts for $15 or $20. So they're not really concerned about it. Whereas in Reactive, a few cents can make a difference for one of these service providers. So I think it's also a question of how competitive your market is. I mean, when it's really competitive, customers tend to take a little bit more risk to have a lower price per meter.
Yeah, can I just add that in the pigment space, I think one of the things we're looking for in technology, in our partnerships with our vendors, is a relentless commitment to ongoing R&D and to solving all of the little problems that come up every day, every week, throughout the life of the equipment. And so I think in our experience, what we have found is if that vendor is not also the ink supplier, there is less investment in supporting you in solving those issues. And again, I would say that's probably kind of specific to pigments, because it is such a quirky, difficult technology space to operate in. But I think that creates sort of the win-win scenario that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Did you want to say something, Ken?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the business model for the print house is as well. I mean, we obviously hear from a lot of different kinds of businesses in this space, and it's quite a complicated market. So we have sort of on one side people investing in cheaper machines with decent print heads and putting high quality inks in them, and then essentially running the printer into the ground and not really considering the cost of the printer, because they're happy to pay for the ink. They're not thinking about amortization of the printer. They know that they're going to only have it for a very short amount of time. And it's to enable them to have an open system, to be flexible with what ink they're using, but also to pick the ink that they think is the best quality for the output. And that we've had feedback that they are the most concerned with the ink quality rather than the printer in a lot of cases. But then on the closed system side, obviously if you're investing in a printer that costs 3 million euros, then having all of the guarantees that come from a closed system from the seller of that printer is very important, especially if it's a single pass printer in terms of head replacement and that kind of thing. So I really think it depends what kind of priorities the business has and where they're angling, and so there's an opportunity for both the open and closed systems in that sense to operate alongside each other.
Yeah, I think fair to say that there was a number of years ago, about the time when some of the faster systems came into the market, a trend at a certain point to move towards open systems, because it's obviously a good marketing story there to say you can buy inks anywhere. And that didn't last very long. I think more recently we've seen a move back to closed systems for the reasons that have been described, because of the disputes that can arise and because of the uncertainty of the quality of the inks that are running through it. And I think the OEMs who do supply open systems have complained over the years that they get a one-off sale, income from one-off sale. They get the burden of support over a certain period of years without any ongoing income. And we've all, I'm sure, bought a home printing system, an inkjet system, where the first time we had to replace the inks cost us more than the machine cost us in the first place. Because that ongoing income is supporting the R&D that's happening, and it allows the OEMs to sell these machines at a reasonable price, because they can spread that cost over a number of years through generating income from the ongoing sales of ink. Do we have any more questions at this point?
Yeah, John, may I ask one more comment?
Yes.
For this town?
Of course.
Okay, there is a type of a printing company, like he said, DTG company, or maybe Spoonflower, or maybe commission printer. The commission printer for the textile, they are forced to run at a very, very low margin. That is why they cannot afford to buy inkjet or to pay for ink if it is expensive, because the margin is so low. On the other hand, maybe DTG company, as he said, they buy some body at a low price and ink is marginal, and then price $15 or something. That has enough margin to absorb this cost. But the people who orders the print to the commission printer is that they can save a lot of cost, risk cost, that they can order on demand. They can wait the ordering time, lead time, until the last moment the weather is fixed. So, or they can avoid the big amount of stock to be wasted or to be disposed in the end of the season. So that is a risk cost. Yeah, today's pricing structure is including that risk cost, and at the end of the summer they will make a heavy discount and sell it out. But now, with on-demand printing, that you can order as much as you like. It depends on the weather or it depends on the friend or whatever. So they can reduce the risk. That means that is a fund to be allocated to the commission printer. So that is a value. So I think, yeah, conventional printing, open or close, or ink is cheap, analog, blah, 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 and there is a breaking point. I think that is a very basic starting point of the discussion. But now we have to think about reallocate the profit to where it is reasonably be allocated.
Thank you. Any hands up just now? Okay, well, I'm going to stick with the on-demand market and particularly direct-to-consumer printing through web portals. This is, as we have identified, Kerry, is an important business in the United States. We see it very widely in the UK. I don't know how many companies there are, but I would guess at least 12 web portals based in the UK selling fabric direct-to-consumer, mostly with the option to customize that fabric along the way through uploading imagery and so on. My question is, that's a sort of limited geography. I'm interested to know whether that same development has happened in other parts of the world that we see represented here, and whether there are particular parts of the world where there are emerging opportunities in this market or opportunity for this market to grow. Tansy, you speak to printers all over the world. You know, what do you hear about this kind of business from the people you speak to?
I think we've seen it across Europe broadly. I mean, a lot of the print houses that I speak to are in Europe. You know, Germany, and the Netherlands in particular. There's a lot of businesses emerging there, whereas places like Portugal are still looking more towards the industrial business-to-business kind of relationships. That's not to say there aren't e-commerce web-to-print businesses there. But yeah, I think it is an emerging model. It really depends to an extent with the B2C fabric printing, what kind of market there is for home sewers and, you know, what kind of cottage industries are emerging, I guess, in those areas. So there's pockets of it all over Europe. I'm not sure if it's in other sort of continents or not really. I've not seen any of it in Africa, for example, as well as South Africa. But yeah, so I would say Europe, yeah. I'm not sure about other regions.
Kerry, you're in Germany as well as America now.
Yeah.
Have you got other territories on your sites where you think there's opportunity arising?
Yeah, well, from the beginning of the launch of Spoonflower, I guess it's over 11 years ago now, we've always had a fairly healthy amount of our business was international, but primarily in English-speaking countries. So the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, in terms of outside of the US. So our venture into Berlin was really about sort of internationalizing our website and having better proximity to our European customer base. And so we see international as a healthy opportunity for us, especially as we're able to offer shopping in other currencies and a web experience that is friendly from a language perspective. And two, we've also seen businesses similar to ours locate in interesting locations around the world. Again, a lot of what Tansy was highlighting, which is fun to see as well. We're kind of kindred spirits.
Okay. In Brazil, Felipe, have we also got a B2C market there in the same way?
Yeah, interestingly, I had the pleasure to visit Gar Davis at Spoonflower 2014. I remember showing him some websites from Brazilian fashion designers begging for Spoonflower to open up in Brazil. So I'm sure there's a lot of demand. Still no initiatives like that, but there's a lot of demand. I think Brazil has an interesting thing that is people still don't know exactly how to sell online. And proof of that is that we had a very interesting company in Brazil, a startup company that was doing work similar to Zazo and these guys that sell probably more like Teespring. That are doing, so someone is designing a shirt and then you publish the shirt and once it reaches a number of sales, you deliver it to customers. And interestingly, this company so they grew crazily over 6 to 8 months and then they went bankrupt, like suddenly. And people were like, what happened to them? And interestingly, they came up with this Brazilian portal where they were selling on demand to customers, and the reason they went bankrupt is because they were sending money to vendors outside Brazil. So people that were creating the shirts and selling in Brazil were not actually from Brazil, but they knew much better than we do on how to advertise and how to invest in Google or Instagram, sales, et cetera. And they had a legal issue on how to send money abroad, which is complicated in Brazil. And because of that, they lost the connection to these vendors from outside Brazil, which represented 70% of their sales. So they got stuck with only 30%, and that was not enough to keep them going. So that is proof that A, there is a big demand, and B, that we failed to be able to offer it. So Brazil is really still doing baby steps on e-commerce. So I think there's a lack of knowledge on really how to sell online. That's the challenge now.
Yeah.
Do you meet it in Turkey? Do you buy online in Turkey then?
Well, I don't think that it is very, very common, like the young generation use. There are a couple of e-commerce platforms, and I think it is only the young generation. I think the majority are still going to the stores in my hometown, Izmir, there are still like new construction of shopping centers, I think, which shows that there's a demand from people. If I just think about specifically for the web to print businesses, I don't think that there is like maybe a couple of DTG, but there is not any like Spoonflower example. It may be because of the price of those products are a bit higher for Turkish market, I guess. But yeah, still not ready.
One final opportunity to ask any remaining questions that you might have before I wind up. No, okay, everyone wants their lunch, but I will go back and ask. I'm going to reverse the question that I asked at the beginning of the panel session. You've told us what you were most interested in here at ITMA. Can I ask you what you haven't seen here at ITMA that you had hoped to see? Tansy.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I'm sure you've all been to a lot of other textile technology shows in recent years, and you'll have seen a lot of micro factories. And I think we are all a little bit sick of seeing show floor micro factories. I don't know if that's just me or if everyone feels like it's a bit like overdone. But what I would say was that I think ITMA posed an opportunity for multiple OEMs to get together themselves rather than relying on the show organizer to create a micro factory to show how you could have inline production. And by that I mean connecting with pre-treatment technology providers, but also cutting technology providers, maybe sewing technology providers. And I think it's a shame that we haven't seen that, because when we talk about vertically integrated factories, when we talk about IoT, when we talk about different open closed systems, you know, it'd be really good to showcase capabilities at an event like ITMA. So I'm a little bit disappointed to have not seen somebody take the initiative on that.
Let's carry on down the line. Kerry.
Yeah, somebody earlier mentioned the interesting technologies that are on the show floor around pre-treatment processes and such, but there's actually not a whole lot of, like, to Tansy's point, integration of those processing steps being shown. It's here and there in small ways, but you have to look fairly hard for it. The other thing I would highlight is that for us, we love dye sublimation from the standpoint of the performance properties and the color properties that that process brings. But from a manufacturing standpoint, nobody in our factory loves working in dye sublimation. And we would really love to see, this is sort of a challenge I'm putting out there, a step change in that technology space that makes that a more appealing technology to work with, particularly the sublimation step itself.
Okay. Mutlu?
Well, I agree with Tansy, but I can't say that I haven't seen, because I was expecting to see pigment solutions, and there are lots of pigment solutions at ITMA. I can only say maybe like next year or 2 years later, if all these solutions are not applied in the industry, and if the share of pigment printing is still 2 or 3%, then I will say, okay, they were not good enough as we expected.
Thank you. Aki?
Yeah, same opinion that Tansy. I take a second. Actually, I'm always attending the show, overseas show, because Japanese show in Japan is boring, just boring. So as far as Inkjet point of view, that is almost nothing happening. So I went to Heim Textile this year, and I went to FESPA, Munich this year, and I also joined the Text Process in Frankfurt this year. There is the DTMF, Digital Textile Microfactory concept, still a concept, but showing something. And I expected here that HP, it's the headquarters of HP White Format, they launched Stitch. And I have been keep watching, okay, FESPA, HP space was a little bit smaller than expected. Before that, ISA, they launched Stitch 300. It's not a big noise. So I expect that finally HP is going to do a big space and noise here in Barcelona, close to the headquarters, including that concept that DTMF, but not so much. No, I don't stick to the HP, but there is a whole three. There is printing and also your processing. There are a small corner of your processing, including Juki or Zun is there. And I understand, of course, that ITMA is mainly the show for the upstream of the textile industry. And Tex process is the midstream of textile industry. But still, next time, Milano 2002.
It's always the next time, Aki.
I expect it to happen.
And finally, Felipe.
Well, apart from the microfactory that I couldn't agree more, I would say that from Brazilian standpoint, people were really looking into more entry-level machines that have a belt. And the reason for that is that over half of what we have in Brazil is die sub. And that means over 2,500 customers in Brazil. And these guys are the potential customers for pigment in Brazil, not the industrial guys, not the ones with reactive. And I see a lot of great solutions on pigment for industrial customers, for people with very nice and high volume. But I haven't seen really good investment in machines for people that want to do 80, 100 linear meters, 150 square meters. So people really missing good machines with belts. So I think there's a gap between the plotters and the small machines from big guys like, I don't know, Emats, Reggiani, EFI, Durst, and etc. So I think that's still a gap that's missing that I hope it gets filled somewhere in time.
Thank you, Felipe, and thank you to all our panel session for giving us your opinion, and indeed to you for participating. Now that brings a conclusion to our morning session. Lunch should be available just outside the doors where you had your drinks when you first arrived here. Please try to be on time for the start of the afternoon session. Thank you.
Thank you.
What time is it?
Good night.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Good question.